You're a burden, Margaret. A constant drain on our resources and time. My daughter-in-law, Rachel, didn't even look up from her phone as she said it, lounging on the sofa I'd paid for in the house my late husband and I had helped them buy. I stood frozen in the doorway between the kitchen and living room, a steaming pot of homemade chicken soup in my oven-mitted hands. The soup I'd made because Jason, my son, had called to say Rachel was coming down with a cold. I'd driven 40 minutes in the rain to deliver it. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't crack. I simply set the pot down on their granite countertop and reached into my purse for my keychain. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The house keys, the spare set I'd had since they moved, dangled from my fingers. I walked over and placed them gently on the coffee table in front of Rachel. "I understand," I said quietly. Her eyes flickered up briefly, showing a moment of surprise before returning to her scrolling. She hadn't expected this calm surrender. She'd wanted a fight, an excuse, a reason to paint me as the difficult one. Instead, I gave her nothing but dignity. I gathered my coat and purse and left without another word. The rain had stopped by the time I reached my car, but I felt a different kind of storm brewing inside me. Not rage, not heartbreak. Something quieter, more resolute. Something that felt like waking up after a very long sleep. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories about finding your worth again when others try to diminish it. My name is Margaret Walsh, and I'm 67 years old. For 34 years, I taught English at Oak Ridge High School, guiding teenagers through the complexities of Shakespeare and Austen, while they guided me through the ever-changing landscape of youth culture. I loved my job, the energy of the classroom, the moment a student's eyes would light up with understanding, the graduation ceremonies where I'd watch them step into their futures. Teaching wasn't just my career, it was my calling. But my greatest joy was my family. Robert, my husband of 41 years, was the steadiest, kindest man I'd ever known. A civil engineer by profession, he approached life with the same precision and care he brought to his bridges and buildings. We met in college. I spilled coffee on his drafting project, and instead of being upset, he asked if I'd replace it with dinner. That was Robert, always finding the opportunity in the disaster. We had one child, our son Jason. From the moment he was born, he became the center of our universe. I can still remember his first steps across our living room floor, his tiny hands reaching for mine, trusting I would catch him if he fell. And I always did. Jason was thoughtful and creative, qualities that eventually led him to become an architect, following somewhat in his father's footsteps, but carving his own path. When Jason brought Rachel home to meet us during his final year of architecture school, I was thrilled. She was studying interior design, razor-sharp intelligent, and beautiful with her sleek dark hair and confident smile. They seemed perfect together, his quiet creativity complementing her bold vision. Robert and I welcomed her warmly. "Any girl who makes our boy smile like that is family," Robert told her at that first dinner, and I nodded in agreement. The wedding was beautiful. I spent months helping with arrangements, sewing Rachel's veil by hand when she mentioned the one she loved was out of their budget. Robert and I gifted them a substantial down payment for their first home, a gorgeous craftsman-style house just 20 minutes from us. Close enough for Sunday dinners, far enough for privacy, Robert had said with a wink when we presented them with the check. When our first grandchild, Emma, was born, I thought my heart might burst with joy. I was there in the delivery room, holding Rachel's hand while Jason paced nervously in the hallway. I brought homemade meals for weeks afterward, did laundry while Rachel napped, rocked Emma through colicky nights so the new parents could get some sleep. "I don't know what we'd do without you, Mom," Jason had said, hugging me tightly. Rachel had smiled tiredly from the couch, nodding in agreement. 3 years later, little Thomas joined the family. By then, Robert had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. The tremors were mild at first, but we both knew what was coming. Still, we embraced our role as grandparents with everything we had. Robert built a magnificent dollhouse for Emma that took him 3 times as long as it would have before the tremors, but he refused to give up. "My granddaughter gets a dollhouse made with Grandpa's love," he insisted, working through frustration and fatigue. As Robert's condition progressed, our dynamics shifted. I became his caretaker, learning to navigate the healthcare system, managing medications, adapting our home as his mobility decreased. Through it all, we still hosted Sunday dinners. I'd cook while Robert entertained the grandchildren with stories from his chair. Jason would help serve and clean up, while Rachel would often be absorbed in her phone or bringing up work projects that needed her attention. The first small fractures appeared during those years. Rachel began finding reasons why we couldn't babysit. The children were too attached to their routine, or overstimulated by different environments. When I offered to come to their house instead, there were scheduling conflicts or last-minute cancellations. I noticed Emma and Thomas appeared in fewer photos with us, more with Rachel's parents who lived 2 hours away but somehow managed to see the children weekly. When Robert's health took a serious decline 5 years ago, Jason visited regularly, sometimes bringing the kids, though Rachel rarely accompanied them. "She's just busy with her design firm taking off," Jason explained, but the excuse felt hollow. Robert never complained. He treasured every moment with our grandchildren, his eyes lighting up even on his worst days when they walked through the door. "Don't let them push you away after I'm gone," Robert whispered to me one night as I adjusted his pillows. "You deserve better than that, Maggie." I kissed his forehead and promised I wouldn't, though at the time I didn't fully understand what he meant. I thought he was just worried about me being lonely. I didn't see the pattern he had already, recognized from his quiet observations. Robert passed away 3 years ago. The funeral was beautiful. His colleagues, our friends, former students, all came to pay respects to the man who had built not just structures, but connections that lasted a lifetime. Jason was a pillar throughout, handling arrangements, staying close. Rachel organized the reception professionally and efficiently, though I noticed she kept checking her watch, hurrying the caterers. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. After the funeral, everything changed. The weekly family dinners dwindled to monthly, then quarterly occasions. My calls went to voicemail more often than not. Invitations to school events for the grandchildren stopped coming entirely. When I mentioned it to Jason, he seemed surprised. "Rachel handles the family calendar. I'm sure it's just an oversight." But it wasn't. It was a calculated withdrawal, a slow and deliberate excision of me from their lives. I began to feel like a visitor in the family I had helped build, always carefully checking for permission to exist in their space. I brought smaller gifts for the children, worried anything too elaborate would be seen as overstepping. I offered help less frequently, afraid of seeming intrusive. I made myself smaller, quieter, less present, all to avoid being unwelcome. Then came the fall. Nothing dramatic. I simply missed a step while carrying groceries into my house. The result was a broken wrist and a badly sprained ankle, not life-threatening, but enough to make daily tasks challenging. The doctor suggested I have someone stay with me for a few weeks during recovery. Naturally, I called Jason. "We're really swamped right now, Mom," he said, sounding genuinely regretful. "Rachel's firm has 3 major projects, and I've got that. Hospital wing design due, plus the kids' activities." His voice trailed off. In the background, I could hear Rachel's muffled voice. Jason covered the phone, but not well enough. Their exchange was brief, but clear. "She wants one of us to stay with her while her wrist heals," Jason explained. "We don't have time for that," Rachel replied sharply. "She's being dramatic." Tell her to hire someone." When Jason returned to our call, his voice was strained. "Mom, there are services for this sort of thing. Professional help might be better anyway." I swallowed my hurt. "Of course, honey. I understand." My next-door neighbor Gloria ended up being my saving grace. 69 and fiercely independent, she checked on me daily, helped with groceries, drove me to follow-up appointments, and provided much-needed company. "Family should be here," she remarked one afternoon, while helping me change my bandages. "They're busy," I replied automatically. Gloria fixed me with a knowing look. Too busy for the woman who'd drop everything. If they needed her? "I don't think so, Margaret. That's not busy. That's choice." Her words stung because they contained a truth I'd been avoiding. For 3 years since Robert's death, I'd been making excuses for their absence, filling the silences with reasons that protected my heart from the reality. They were choosing to exclude me. The real breaking point came at Emma's 10th birthday party. I wasn't invited initially. I only learned about it when Gloria's granddaughter mentioned seeing the event on social media. When I called Jason to ask about it, he sounded flustered. "Oh, we're just doing something small this year," he explained. "Family only." The words hit like a physical blow. Family only. And I, apparently, no longer qualified. "I am family, Jason," I said quietly. There was an uncomfortable pause. "Of course, Mom. I just meant, it's at Rachel's parents' lake house. It's a whole weekend thing. You wouldn't be comfortable." After some awkward back and forth, an invitation was reluctantly extended. I should have declined, preserved my dignity, but I couldn't bear missing my granddaughter's birthday. So I went, packing thoughtful gifts and Emma's favorite lemon cupcakes with raspberry frosting. The lake house was stunning, modern and spacious with floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the water. Rachel's parents, the Prestons, greeted me politely but coolly. Mrs. Preston, "Call me Vivian, please," gave air kisses beside my cheeks, while Mr. Preston, James, offered a firm handshake and immediately returned to manning the grill. I quickly realized I was the only non-Preston relative invited. Rachel's sisters were there with their families, her aunts, uncles, cousins, a full family reunion disguised as a birthday party. In family photos, I was an afterthought, sometimes included with a hasty, "Oh, Margaret, come join us," that made it clear I was not automatically considered part of the group. Emma was delighted with the hand-knitted sweater I'd made her, throwing her arms around me in a genuine hug that momentarily washed away all the discomfort. "You're the only one who knows purple is my favorite color now. Not pink anymore," she whispered. Thomas showed me his collection of rocks found along the lake shore, his small hand trustingly in mine as we walked the property. These moments were islands of connection in a sea of exclusion. During dinner, conversation flowed around me rather than including me. I was seated at the far end of the table, away from the grandchildren, away from Jason. Rachel dominated the evening, sharing stories about Emma that sometimes featured corrections to my memories. "Actually, Emma's first steps were at our house, not at your place," she said when I mentioned the milestone. "You're misremembering. It happens at your age." No one contradicted her, though I clearly recalled Emma toddling across my living room rug, Robert capturing the moment on video. A video that was probably still in a box somewhere in my house, unwatched since his passing. That night in the guest room, the smallest in the house, with a view of the parking area rather than the lake, I sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed myself to cry. Not loud, heaving sobs, but quiet tears that had been building for 3 years. I missed Robert desperately in that moment. He would have known what to say, how to navigate this gradual erasure with grace but also with firmness. The next morning, I packed my overnight bag before breakfast. Jason found me placing it in my car. "You're leaving? The party's not over until tomorrow." "I think it's better this way," I said. Give my love to Emma and Thomas. He frowned. Mom, what's going on? Are you not feeling well? I looked at my son, the boy I'd raised, the man I'd supported through every triumph and setback, and saw a stranger who couldn't or wouldn't see what was happening. I'm fine, Jason. I'm just tired of pretending I belong here when it's clear I don't. That's not true, he protested, but weakly. Of course you belong. When was the last time you called me just to talk? When was the last time the children came to visit me? When did you last ask about my life instead of just responding to a direct need? He had no answer, just uncomfortable shifting and glances toward the house where Rachel might appear any moment. I love you, Jason. I always will, but I won't keep inserting myself where I'm not wanted. I got into my car and drove away, watching him standing in the driveway growing smaller in my rearview mirror. The drive home was clarifying. With each mile, I felt something hardening within me, not my heart, but my resolve. For 3 years, I'd been shrinking myself, making accommodations, accepting scraps of attention, and calling it relationship. No more. As I pulled into my driveway, I made a decision. I would no longer chase them. I would no longer beg for inclusion in my own family. I would reclaim my dignity, my home, my life. What I didn't realize was how soon my resolve would be tested, and how dramatically everything was about to change. The call came 3 days after I returned from the birthday weekend. Rachel's voice, unusually sweet, caught me off guard. Margaret? I hope I'm not disturbing you. Not at all. I replied cautiously. Is everything all right? Oh yes, actually better than all right. I have wonderful news. We're renovating the house. Full remodel, top to bottom. I've been wanting to do this for years, and we finally got approved for the financing. That's nice, I said, wondering why this merited a personal call after months of minimal contact. The thing is, Rachel continued, her voice maintaining that honeyed tone, the contractors say we'll need to vacate for at least 3 months during the major structural work. We were going to rent a place, but then Jason remembered your house. Has that separate suite you added for Robert's care? It would be perfect for us. The addition she referred to was the accessible apartment we had built onto our home when Robert's mobility declined. A bedroom, bathroom, small sitting area, and kitchenette, all designed for comfort and independence. After his passing, I'd maintained it meticulously, occasionally using it as a guest suite for visiting friends. You want to move in? I asked, making sure I understood. Just temporarily, Rachel assured me. 3 months, 4 at most. The children would love to spend more time with you, and it would save us a fortune in rental costs. It's really a win-win. Except it wasn't. The timing was too convenient. The sudden interest in family togetherness too transparent. This wasn't about connection. It was about convenience and cost saving. The very people who had systematically excluded me now wanted to use my home as free accommodation. I'll need to think about it, I said carefully. Oh. Rachel's tone cooled noticeably. Jason was sure you'd be thrilled. You're always saying you want to see the grandchildren more. I do, but this is a significant change to consider. Well, don't think too long. The contractors are ready to start next week, and we need to finalize our living arrangements. After we hung up, I sat in Robert's old armchair, running my fingers along the worn fabric where his hands had rested. What would you do? I whispered to the empty room. The answer came not in his voice, but in my own memories. Robert standing. Firm when our boundaries were crossed, Robert valuing himself enough to expect respect, Robert gently but firmly holding others accountable. The following day, Jason called, clearly dispatched to secure my agreement. Mom, I know it's a lot to ask, but it would mean everything to have this family time. The kids miss you. Do they? I asked quietly. Or do you and Rachel need free housing? His stammered response told me everything. It's not, we just thought, It makes financial sense, and yes, the family connection is important too. The family connection has apparently not been important for 3 years, Jason. Not since your father died. That's not fair, he protested. We've been busy building our lives, our careers. Too busy for Sunday dinner once a month? Too busy to return phone calls? Too busy to include me in family photos? Silence stretched between us, then softer. Rachel thinks you're too critical of her parenting. She says you're always questioning her decisions, offering unsolicited advice. This was news to me. I had been carefully tiptoeing around Rachel for years, specifically to avoid any perception of interference. When have I ever criticized her parenting? You know, comments about the children's diet, screen time, the activities they're in, versus the ones you think they should try. I racked my brain, recalling only the most gentle of suggestions, always offered with qualifiers like, "You're doing wonderfully, but have you considered?" Or, "When you were little, we found that." Jason, that's not criticism. That's conversation. That's being a grandmother with experience to share. Well, it makes Rachel uncomfortable. She feels judged. I took a deep breath. I'm sorry. She feels that way, truly. But I'm not comfortable having you all move in if I'm such a burden to her. No one said you're a burden. He backpedaled quickly. Actually, I said, my voice steady, Rachel did. Just last week when I brought over soup. Her exact words were that I'm a burden and a constant drain on your resources and time. Jason was silent for so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Finally, he spoke, his voice strained. She was probably just stressed about something. She didn't mean it. She meant it, Jason, and now you want to move into my home after making it abundantly clear I'm barely welcome in yours? Mom, please, the renovation is happening. We need somewhere to stay. In that moment, I saw clearly what I needed to do. Not out of spite or revenge, but out of self-respect and the healthy boundaries Robert had always encouraged. I'll make you an offer, I said calmly. You can use the addition, not the main house, just the separate suite. You'll pay market rate, rent, with a formal lease agreement. You'll respect my privacy and my rules in my home. And before you move in, Rachel will apologize for calling me a burden. Rent? Jason sounded shocked. Mom, we're family. Yes, we are. And family respects each other. Family doesn't take advantage. Family doesn't exclude someone for years and then expect free housing when it's convenient. Jason's voice hardened. I'll talk to Rachel and get back to you. 3 days passed with no word. On the 4th day, Rachel called again. Margaret, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Jason says you want us to pay rent to stay in your house? That seems rather mercenary, don't you think? Not at all, I replied evenly. I think it's a reasonable arrangement given our current relationship. Our current relationship? She gave a little laugh. We're family. Are we? Because family generally sees each other more than 3 times a year. Family generally doesn't call other family members a burden. There was a sharp intake of breath. Jason told you that? I was having a bad day. You know how stressful my work is. I do know. I also know that words matter, Rachel. Actions matter more. For 3 years, your actions have shown me exactly where I stand in your family hierarchy. Now you need something from me and suddenly I'm supposed to forget all that? So this is punishment? Her voice had an edge now. No, it's consequence. It's reality. You can stay in the addition under the terms I outlined to Jason, or you can find alternative accommodation. The choice is yours. Rachel's tone turned icy. I'll discuss it with Jason, but I think you're making a big mistake. The children will be devastated. The children barely know me anymore, Rachel, and that was your choice, not mine. After hanging up, I felt lighter than I had in years. Standing my ground didn't feel bitter or angry. It felt right. It felt like honoring Robert's memory and the strength he always knew I had, even when I doubted it myself. The next day, a text from Jason. "We found a short-term rental. Thanks anyway." I wasn't surprised. Their need for housing had never been dire enough to warrant respect or compromise. It had simply been an opportunity they thought they could exploit. Now that it came with conditions, with acknowledgement of their behavior, they were no longer interested. What did surprise me was the wave of relief I felt. For the first time since Robert's death, I had advocated for myself. I had refused to be diminished. I had reclaimed my worth. And while that meant continued distance from my son and grandchildren, it no longer felt like a loss I couldn't bear. It felt like a painful but necessary step toward healing. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of my journey back to myself. A journey that would lead to unexpected places, new connections, and ultimately, a reckoning none of us saw coming. The weeks after refusing Rachel and Jason's request stretched into a strange, quiet limbo. I kept expecting a follow-up call, perhaps an attempt at reconciliation, or at least an acknowledgement of the tension between us. But there was nothing. Complete radio silence. At first, I checked my phone constantly, jumping whenever it buzzed with a notification. But it was never them, just billing reminders, weather alerts, the occasional text from a former colleague. I tried to convince myself this was a good thing. I had set a boundary, stood my ground, reclaimed my dignity. But in the hollow echo of my empty house, those victories felt Pyrrhic. I missed my grandchildren fiercely. I missed the son I thought I knew. I even missed the strained walking on eggshells version of family gatherings that had been our norm for the past 3 years. At least then I had seen their faces, heard their voices, been allowed to exist in their orbit, however peripherally. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, I found myself wandering through my house like a ghost, trailing my fingers over furniture, photographs, memories. In Emma's favorite reading nook, a window seat I'd decorated with plush pillows and a small bookshelf, I discovered a forgotten copy of The Secret Garden. Emma had left it during her last visit nearly 8 months ago. I opened it and a pressed flower fell out, a violet she must have tucked between the pages. Such a small thing, this dried purple bloom, but it unraveled me completely. I sat on the window seat, clutching the book to my chest, and finally allowed myself to grieve. Not just the current estrangement, but everything. Robert's death. The slow erosion of my relationship with Jason. The gradual excision from my grandchildren's lives. The realization that the family I had devoted my life to building no longer had room for me. I cried until my throat was raw and my eyes burned, the rain outside a perfect accompaniment to my sorrow. When the storm of emotion finally passed, I felt hollow but somehow clearer. I placed the book back on the shelf but kept the pressed violet, tucking it into my wallet as a reminder of what I wasn't yet sure. Perhaps of Emma's innocence in all this adult conflict. Perhaps of the beauty that remains even after life seems to have drained away. Perhaps simply as a talisman against forgetting what matters most. The next morning, I woke with swollen eyes, but a resolute heart. I couldn't control Jason and Rachel's choices. I couldn't force my way back into their lives. But I could choose how I responded to this rejection. I could choose whether to let it define me. Robert's voice seemed to whisper in my ear, "You've always been more than just a mother and grandmother, Maggie. Remember who you are." So I began, slowly and deliberately, to reclaim the pieces of myself that had been shelved during Robert's illness and neglected in the grief that followed. I called my old principal and arranged to volunteer as a reading tutor twice a week. I joined a watercolor class at the community center, something I'd always wanted to try but never found the time for. I started walking every morning, reacquainting myself with my neighborhood, nodding to familiar faces that gradually became friendly ones. Gloria, my next-door neighbor who had helped during my recovery, became a regular companion for coffee and conversation. Unlike most people who offered hollow platitudes about family reconciliation, Gloria understood the particular pain of familial estrangement. Her own daughter hadn't spoken to her in over a decade, a rift caused by addiction and enabled by a son-in-law who preferred his wife disconnected from her support system. "People think estrangement only happens to bad parents," Gloria said one afternoon as we deadheaded roses in her garden. "They can't imagine that sometimes good people get pushed out of their children's lives for saying no to something unreasonable, for maintaining a boundary, for simply being inconvenient." Her words were a balm to the persistent ache in my chest, the one that whispered I must have done something terrible to deserve such treatment, that if I had been a better mother, a more accommodating mother-in-law, this wouldn't have happened. Gloria's understanding helped me see that sometimes, no matter how much love you give, no matter how carefully you try to navigate complex family dynamics, relationships fracture. And sometimes, the healthiest response is not to demolish your own boundaries trying to repair what others have broken. 3 months passed in this new rhythm of life. I won't pretend they were easy months, but they were healing ones. Each day I rediscovered some small part of myself that had been overshadowed by caregiving, by grief, by the desperate attempt to maintain a connection to my son's family. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done since college. I took myself to art exhibits and community theater performances. I adopted an elderly cat named Professor from the local shelter, a dignified orange tabby with one eye and a purr like distant thunder. Then, on a crisp fall morning, much like the day Robert had proposed to me 44 years earlier, I received a certified letter. My hands trembled slightly as I signed for it, an inexplicable dread pooling in my stomach. The return address belonged to a law firm I didn't recognize: Callaway, Bennett and Schmidt. Inside was a formal legal document and a brief cover letter informing me that my son and daughter-in-law were initiating legal proceedings regarding the house, specifically challenging the conditions of the mortgage assistance Robert and I had provided for their down payment 7 years ago. I sat heavily at my kitchen table, reading and rereading the dense legal language until it finally clarified into understanding. Jason and Rachel were claiming that our financial contribution had been an investment, not a gift, and that I, maintained partial ownership of their home. They were renovating with the intention to sell. Apparently, Rachel's design firm was opening a branch in another state, and they wanted to settle any claims I might have on the property. Before proceeding, the absurdity of it struck me like a physical blow. The money had been a gift. A generous one, certainly, but unequivocally a gift. There had never been any discussion of investment or ownership stakes. Robert and I had simply wanted to help. Our son and his wife establish themselves, create a stable home for our future grandchildren. We had written "gift" in the memo line of the check for heaven's sake. But now, this gift was being twisted into a legal liability. They weren't asking for my blessing to move, or expressing regret about taking the children further from their grandmother. They were treating me like a potential obstacle, a complication to be resolved through legal channels rather than family conversation. I called the one lawyer I knew personally, Michael Abernathy, who had handled Robert's will and my own estate planning. He agreed to review the documents immediately. "This is preposterous," he said when we met the following day. "There's no legal basis for their claim that this was an investment. All the documentation clearly shows it was a gift. They're trying to create a problem where none exists, possibly to justify something else." "What do you mean?" I asked. Michael leaned forward, his expression grave but kind. "Margaret, I've seen this before. Sometimes when people are planning major life changes that they know might hurt others, like moving your grandchildren across state lines, they try to create a conflict first. It makes it easier to justify cutting ties if they can tell themselves you've done something wrong." His words landed like stones in still water, rippling through my consciousness with expanding clarity. This wasn't about the money or the house. This was about creating a narrative where I was the villain, the difficult mother-in-law making unreasonable claims, the burden they needed to escape. They were manufacturing a conflict to justify the distance they had already created, and now planned to expand. "What should I do?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Legally, we respond firmly, but factually. We provide the documentation showing the money was a gift, we reject their characterization, and we make it clear you're making no claims on their property. He paused. "Personally? That's a different question altogether?" I nodded, understanding. The distinction. The legal response was straightforward. The emotional one, how to process this betrayal, how to move forward knowing my son was actively working to frame me as an adversary. That was far more complex. I spent the next week in a fog of disbelief and hurt. I went through the motions of my daily routines, tutoring, watercolor class, morning walks, but inside, I was grappling with a pain deeper than I'd felt even in those first dark days after Robert's death. My husband's passing had been a natural loss, sad but part of life's expected progression. This betrayal by my only child felt unnatural, a perversion of the family bond I had always believed was unbreakable. I found myself returning to the family photo albums I had carefully maintained over the decades. There was Jason on his 5th birthday, beaming with chocolate frosting on his chin. Jason at his high school graduation, arms slung around Robert's shoulders, both of them looking at the camera with identical proud smiles. Jason dancing with me at his wedding, my eyes closed as I leaned into his embrace, treasuring the moment. Had I imagined the love in those images? Had I been fooling myself about the strength of our connection? Or had something fundamentally changed in my son? Something I had missed while focusing on Robert's illness? Something Rachel had perhaps nurtured or exploited? I didn't want to blame Rachel entirely. That felt too easy, too convenient. The stereotypical mother-in-law transferring all responsibility to the woman who stole her son. Adult relationships are complex, choices shared. If Jason was allowing this treatment of me, he was equally responsible. Yet I couldn't deny that the estrangement had accelerated dramatically after Rachel entered his life, and particularly after Robert's death removed his moderating influence. As I waited for Michael to prepare our legal response, I received an unexpected visitor. It was a cloudy Saturday afternoon, and I was repotting some spider plants in the sunroom when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, but Gloria sometimes stopped by unannounced, so I wiped my hands on my gardening apron and went to answer. Standing on my porch was Thomas, my grandson, alone and slightly out of breath as if he'd been running. "Thomas," I exclaimed, momentarily frozen in shock. How did you get here?" "I rode my bike," he said matter-of-factly, pointing to a blue bicycle tossed haphazardly on my front lawn. "Can I come in, Grandma? I'm thirsty." I ushered him inside, mind racing. Their house was over 5 miles away, with several busy intersections between. Thomas was only 8, far too young to be making such a journey alone. Jason and Rachel must be frantic. "Thomas, do your parents know you're here?" I asked as I poured him a glass of lemonade. He shook his head, taking a long gulp. "They're fighting again, about the move. Dad doesn't want to go, but Mom says her new job is too important to pass up." My heart sank. So it was true. They were planning to move out of state. "Sweetheart, we need to call your parents right away. They must be worried sick." Thomas's face fell. "Are you mad at me?" No, I assured him, kneeling to meet his eyes. "I'm never mad to see you. I've missed you terribly. But your parents need to know you're safe." I called Jason's cell. "Phone?" And he answered on the first ring, his voice tight with panic. "Hello?" "Jason, it's Mom. Thomas is here with me. He's fine." The explosive relief on the other end was palpable. "Oh, thank God." We've been searching the neighborhood for an hour. Rachel's talking to the police right now. His voice moved, away from the phone. Rachel, he's at my mom's. Then back to me. We'll be right there. While we waited, Thomas explored the house as if rediscovering a half-forgotten dream. He ran his fingers over the model airplanes he and Robert used to build together, still displayed on shelves in the den. He checked if his favorite cookies were still in the blue tin on the counter. They were. I kept them stocked out of habit. And hope. He visited Professor, who surprisingly tolerated the child's enthusiastic petting with dignified forbearance. I remember this house better than our new one, Thomas said as he munched a cookie at the kitchen table. The new one doesn't have any memories yet. New one? I asked gently. The one we're going to live in when we move to Michigan. Mom showed us pictures. It's big, but it doesn't have a treehouse like the one Grandpa Robert said he'd build us someday. My throat tightened. Robert had indeed promised to build a treehouse in the sturdy oak in their backyard once the children were a bit older. His illness had prevented it, and after his death, the promise had apparently been forgotten by everyone except Thomas. Michigan is very far away, I said carefully. Thomas nodded solemnly. That's why Dad's mad. He says it's too far from you and his job and our school, but Mom says we need a fresh start. A fresh start. Away from me. Away from the reminders of obligations and connections they no longer wanted to maintain. The legal letter made even more sense now, clearing the way for a clean break, both physically and emotionally. 20 minutes later, a car screeched into my driveway. Rachel reached the door first, bursting in without knocking, her face a mask of worry and barely concealed anger. Thomas! She cried, rushing to gather him into a fierce hug. Do you have any idea how scared we were? You can't just disappear like that. Jason followed, his expression a complex mixture of relief, embarrassment, and something else. Shame, perhaps, as his eyes briefly met mine before darting away. I'm sorry, Thomas mumbled into Rachel's shoulder. I just wanted to see Grandma. You said we couldn't because of grown-up stuff. Rachel stiffened, then pulled back to look at her son. We'll discuss this at home. Go wait in the car, please. Once Thomas was out of earshot, Rachel turned to me, arms crossed defensively. I hope you didn't encourage this. Encourage my grandson to cycle 5 miles alone across major intersections? Of course not, Rachel. I would never endanger him that way. Then why did he come here? We've barely mentioned you in months. The casual cruelty of that statement hung in the air between us. Jason winced visibly, but said nothing. Perhaps, I said quietly. That's exactly why he came. Children are perceptive. They notice when people they love suddenly disappear from their lives with no explanation. Rachel's eyes narrowed. We've had a lot going on. The renovation, my career advancement, now this move. To Michigan, I finished for her. Yes, Thomas mentioned it. Jason finally spoke, his voice strained. We were going to tell you once things were finalized. The way you told me about your legal action regarding the house, I asked. Through certified mail and attorneys? Rachel's chin lifted defiantly. That was a necessary precaution. You made it clear you feel entitled to make financial demands. I shook my head, astonished at the distortion. I asked you to pay fair rent for using my home after you called me a burden. That's not entitlement, Rachel. That's self-respect. This is exactly why we're keeping our distance, she snapped. You twist everything. Make yourself the victim. That's enough, Jason interrupted, surprising both of us. Thomas is waiting, in the car. We need to go. Rachel gave me one last cold look before turning on her heel and walking out. Jason lingered momentarily, conflict evident in his expression. I didn't know about the legal letter until after it was sent, he said quietly. Rachel's father recommended his business attorney. It got out of hand. And yet you didn't stop it, I observed. You didn't call me. You didn't come by. You let me receive that letter and think my only child was threatening legal action against me. He looked away. It's complicated, Mom. No, Jason, it's actually very simple. You're choosing a path that excludes me from your life and your children's lives. That's your right. But at least have the courage to own that choice instead of hiding behind lawyers and complications. For a moment, I thought I saw a flash of the son I remembered. Thoughtful, principled, kind. But it vanished as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by the conflict-avoidant man Rachel had shaped him into. We'll be in touch about the move, he said vaguely, already retreating toward the door. After they left, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, Professor purring in my lap as I stroked his fur mechanically. The house felt emptier than before, the brief presence of my grandson making his absence, and the absence of the family I once had, all the more acute. But alongside the renewed grief was something unexpected: clarity. Seeing Rachel's hostility up close, witnessing Jason's passive acceptance of it, understanding that they were literally planning to put hundreds of miles between us, it crystallized something I had been reluctant to fully acknowledge. This estrangement wasn't temporary. It wasn't a phase. It was a deliberate choice they were doubling down on, and no amount of self-diminishment on my part would change that trajectory. Perhaps most revealing was Thomas's innocent determination to maintain a connection with me despite their efforts to sever it. Children often see truths adults try to obscure. His bicycle journey spoke volumes about the natural bonds his parents were artificially disrupting. That night, I called Michael and asked him to take a more aggressive stance than we had initially planned. I want a formal acknowledgement that the money was a gift, I said, and I want it notarized and filed. If they're going to treat me like a legal adversary rather than family, then I want absolute clarity and protection. Are you sure? He asked. Taking a harder line might escalate things. I thought of Thomas's face lighting up as he rediscovered his grandfather's model airplanes. I thought of the pressed violet from Emma's forgotten book. I thought of the casual way Rachel had said they'd barely mentioned me in months. I'm sure, I said. It's time I stopped pretending this situation is anything other than what it is. They've made their choice, Michael. Now I'm making mine. What I didn't tell him, what I had only just begun to acknowledge to myself, was that this clarity, painful as it was, also brought a strange sort of freedom. If reconciliation wasn't possible, if my son and daughter-in-law were determined to frame me as an obstacle rather than family, then perhaps it was time to stop organizing my life around a relationship that no longer existed in any meaningful way. Perhaps it was time to take it all back, not just my financial contribution to their house, but my emotional investment in people who had made it clear they didn't value it. Perhaps it was time to redirect that love, that energy, that capacity for connection toward people and purposes that would welcome it. As I prepared for bed that night, I noticed Robert's reading glasses still on his nightstand where I'd left them after his death. I picked them up, turning them over in my hands, remembering how he would peer over them at me with that mischievous smile that had first captured my heart in college. I think I'm finally ready, Robert, I whispered to the empty room. Ready to live for myself again. Ready to let go of what's gone and find what's next. I placed the glasses carefully in the drawer, not discarding them, never that, but putting them away properly, respectfully. Acknowledging the past without letting it prevent me from moving toward the future. The journey ahead would not be easy. The legal response to Jason and Rachel's action was just the beginning. But for the first time since that rainy day with the chicken soup and Rachel's casual cruelty, I felt something like peace. Not because the pain had disappeared, but because I had finally stopped believing I deserved it. Michael's legal response was measured but unequivocal. He provided documented proof that our financial contribution had been a gift, including copies of the original check with gift, clearly written in the memo line, correspondence between us, and Jason discussing the nature of the contribution, and even a thank you card from Rachel herself that specifically expressed gratitude for your generous gift toward our first home. The language was polite but firm. There was no claim on their property. There never had been, and any suggestion otherwise was entirely unfounded. We expected a fight. What we received instead was silence, followed 2 weeks later by a terse email from Jason informing me they had accepted a cash offer on the house and would be moving to Michigan at the end of the month. No mention of the legal matter, no acknowledgement of Michael's response, just a cold notification of their departure like I was a utility company that needed to be informed of an address change. I stared at that email for a long time, the blue light of my computer screen casting shadows across my living room as evening fell. The finality of it struck me like a physical blow. They were really leaving. Taking my grandchildren hundreds of miles away without discussion, without compromise, without even the courtesy of a proper goodbye. For a moment, the familiar wave of grief threatened to pull me under. But then Professor jumped onto my lap, his one eye regarding me with what I chose to interpret as feline wisdom, and I took a deep breath. This wasn't the end of my story, just the end of a chapter. A painful one, certainly, but not the final one. We're going to be okay, I told Professor, scratching behind his ears. Different, but okay. The next day, I called Gloria and asked if she would accompany me on a mission. I need to do something difficult, I explained, and I'd appreciate a friend beside me. That's how we found ourselves standing in front of Jason and Rachel's house, my former dream home for them. On a bright October morning, a sold sign stood proudly in the yard, and a moving truck was already parked in the driveway. My timing was deliberate. I knew Rachel would be at her office finalizing arrangements for her transfer, but Jason would likely be home overseeing the movers. Are you sure about this? Gloria asked gently as we walked up the path to the front door. I nodded. I need closure. Real closure, not just an email notification. Jason answered the door with a phone pressed to his ear, his expression shifting from distracted to shocked when he saw me. I'll call you back, he said quickly into the phone, then stood awkwardly in the doorway, neither inviting me in, nor sending me away. Hello, Jason, I said, keeping my voice steady. I thought we should say goodbye properly. He glanced past me at Gloria, who gave a small wave from where she waited on the sidewalk, then back to me. Mom, this isn't a good time. The movers are here. I've got a million things to coordinate. I know, I interrupted gently. That's why I came now, not on moving day itself. I won't stay long. I couldn't let you leave without saying what needs to be said. Something in my tone must have reached him, because after a moment's hesitation, he stepped back, allowing me inside. The house was in disarray. Half-packed boxes everywhere, furniture wrapped in protective blankets, the walls bare where family photos had once hung. It felt like a physical manifestation of the dismantling of our relationship. Is Rachel here? I asked, though I already knew the answer. No, she's at the office, Jason replied, confirming my suspicion. He cleared a stack of flattened boxes from the sofa, gesturing for me to sit. Mom, if this is about the legal thing, it's not, I said, remaining standing. That's resolved. Your attorney should have informed you that the money was documented as a gift, with no strings attached or ownership implied. Your house is yours to sell. Your lives yours to live as you see fit. He had the grace to look embarrassed. Yeah, we got that clarification. Rachel's dad had misunderstood the situation. I highly doubted that, but I hadn't come to argue. I'm here to say goodbye, Jason, and to give you something. From my purse, I withdrew a small, carefully wrapped package and handed it to him. He took it with visible confusion. Open it, I encouraged. Inside was a simple wooden box I had commissioned, from a local craftsman. Jason opened it to reveal two items: a worn silver pocket watch that had belonged to Robert and a handwritten letter. "That was your father's," I explained as he lifted the watch. "His father gave it to him when he turned 18. He wanted you to have it, but things were so chaotic during his illness and afterward. Well, the right moment never seemed to come." Jason swallowed hard, running his thumb over the engraved initials on the back of the watch. "And the letter? That's from me. You can read it later when I'm gone and you have some privacy." I paused, gathering my strength for what came next. "It explains why I won't be contacting you anymore, Jason." His head snapped up. "What?" "I'm letting you go," I said simply, not out of anger or spite, but out of love. For you, for the grandchildren, and for myself. This constant push and pull, this rejection followed by convenience-based inclusion, it's not healthy for any of us. So I'm stepping back completely. "You're cutting us off?" His voice held disbelief and a hint of indignation that made me want to laugh at the irony. "No, Jason. You cut me off years ago in all the ways that matter. I'm just finally acknowledging that reality and responding accordingly. The letter explains everything. My feelings, my perspective on what's happened between us, and my wishes for your future. It also includes my new email address, which will remain constant even though I'm moving." "You're moving? Where? When?" I smiled sadly. "Does it matter? You're leaving for Michigan. Would knowing my new address change anything about your plans or your life?" He had no answer for that, his gaze dropping back to the watch in his hands. "My new contact information is in the letter," I continued. "If the children ever want to reach out when they're older, that avenue will always be open to them. I will always love them, and you, no matter what. But I won't chase a relationship that exists only on your terms, only when it's convenient for Rachel, only when you need something from me." Jason's expression darkened. "That's not fair. We've been building our own lives, our own family unit." "Yes, you have," I agreed. "And that's natural and right. But the way you've gone about it, systematically excluding me, allowing Rachel to call me a burden, treating me like a legal adversary rather than your mother, that was a choice, Jason. Your choice. I'm simply making mine in response." I turned to leave, but paused at the door. "The children's special items are in a box in my attic. Emma's baby blanket, Thomas's first drawings, the handprint ornaments they made with your father. If they ever want those mementos, they're preserved and waiting, just like my love for them." Before he could respond, I walked out, closing the door softly behind me. Gloria met me at the sidewalk, her face full of concern. "Are you all right?" she asked, linking her arm through mine. I took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air. "I think I will be, for the first time in a very long time." 2 days later, the moving truck arrived at my house, not to take things away but to deliver new possibilities. I had made the decision to sell my home of 37 years and relocate to the coastal town Robert and I had always dreamed of retiring to. It wasn't running away. It was running towards something we had planned together, a dream deferred but not forgotten. The cottage I purchased was nothing like our family home, smaller, brighter, with a garden that sloped gently toward the sea. It needed work, but that was part of its charm. Projects would keep my hands and mind busy as I built this new life for myself. Professor adapted to our new surroundings with surprising enthusiasm, claiming a sunny windowsill overlooking the garden as his domain. Gloria cried when I told her I was leaving, but she understood. "You need a fresh canvas," she said, helping me pack my most treasured books, somewhere without ghosts around every corner. She promised to visit in the summer, and I believed her. True friendship, I was learning, didn't diminish with distance. It was the superficial connections that couldn't withstand separation, the ones built on convenience rather than genuine care. I had been in my new home for just over a month when a small package arrived in the mail. The return address was from Michigan, but it wasn't Jason's handwriting on the label. It was Emma's careful, still developing script. Inside was a handmade card featuring a purple watercolor flower that immediately brought to mind the pressed violet I still carried in my wallet. The message inside was simple. I miss you, Grandma. Can I write to you? Love, Emma. Enclosed. With the card was a letter from Jason. Unlike Emma's straightforward message, his was complex, part apology, part justification, part tentative olive branch. He explained that he had read my letter several times, that it had made him think about things differently. Rachel wasn't ready for direct contact, he wrote, but she had agreed that the children could maintain a relationship with me through letters and occasional phone calls. It wasn't everything. It wasn't a full reconciliation or acknowledgement of how deeply their actions had hurt me. But it was something. A small opening. A tiny crack in the wall of separation. And it had come because I had finally stood my ground rather than continuing to chase their approval. I wrote back to Emma immediately, enclosing photographs of Professor and my new garden, asking about her school and friends in Michigan, promising to be a faithful pen pal. To Jason, I sent a briefer note, thanking him for facilitating Emma's contact, accepting the limited connection he was offering, making it clear that while my door remained open, I would no longer walk through it unless genuinely welcomed. As winter settled over my coastal cottage, I found myself developing routines that centered around my own interests, rather than the constant hope of family inclusion. I joined a book club at the local library, volunteered teaching English to recent immigrants at the community center, and even began dating, cautiously, casually, a kind widower named David who owned the garden center in town and had provided invaluable advice on making my neglected yard bloom again. On Christmas morning, a holiday I had dreaded spending alone, I woke to find my small house filled with unexpected warmth. There were cards from my book club members propped on the mantel, a beautiful orchid from David with a note inviting me to Christmas dinner with his daughter's family, and most surprisingly, a video call from both Emma and Thomas squeezed in, before Rachel whisked them off to her parents' home for celebrations. "Grandma, I lost 2 teeth," Thomas announced proudly, pulling his lip down to show me the gaps. "And I got the lead in the winter play," Emma added. "I wish you could come see it." "Me too, sweetheart," I said, my heart full as I watched their animated faces. "But maybe you can have your dad record it and send me the video?" They chatted about their new home, their school, the friends they were making. Neither mentioned Rachel, and I didn't ask. This fragile connection was too precious to risk with complicated questions. As we said goodbye, Thomas pressed his hand to the screen. "Dad says we might visit you in the summer. Is that true?" I glanced at Jason, who had appeared briefly in the background. "We'll see," he said noncommittally, but there was a softness in his expression I hadn't seen in years. After the call ended, I sat in my reading nook overlooking the winter ocean, Professor purring beside me, and felt a sense of peace wash over me. The future was uncertain. Jason's tentative overtures might strengthen into genuine reconnection, or they might falter under Rachel's continued resistance. The promised summer visit might materialize, or it might join the long list of disappointed hopes I had learned to release. But for the first time, that uncertainty didn't feel devastating. I had built a life that was meaningful and rich, regardless of their presence in it. I had found strength I didn't know I possessed, independence I had forgotten during years of trying to accommodate their escalating rejection. I had taken back my dignity, my purpose, and my joy. That evening, as I prepared to join David and his family for dinner, I paused before my mirror to fasten the silver earrings Robert had given me on our last anniversary together. My reflection showed a woman transformed, not by dramatic physical changes, but by the light in her eyes, the set of her shoulders, the quiet confidence in her smile. You were right, I whispered to Robert's memory. I had to stop chasing their approval. I had to remember my own worth. As spring melted into summer, my garden burst into vibrant life, not unlike my own unexpected renaissance. The book club had evolved into a circle of genuine friends. My volunteer work had expanded to include mentoring young women pursuing education later in life. David and I had settled into a comfortable companionship that brought laughter and tenderness back into my days. And yes, Jason did bring the children to visit, though Rachel found a work emergency that prevented her from joining them. For one glorious week, my cottage echoed with the sounds I had missed most. Emma's thoughtful questions, Thomas's exuberant storytelling, even Jason's deep laugh that reminded me so much of Robert. It wasn't perfect. There were awkward moments, careful conversations, boundaries still being negotiated, but it was authentic in a way our interaction hadn't been for years. Without the pressure of trying to preserve a relationship that had already been broken, we were slowly discovering if a new one could be built on more honest foundations. On their last evening, as the children collected shells on the beach below my garden, Jason joined me on the porch swing. "You seem happy here," he observed, his gaze taking in the flourishing garden, the comfortable cottage, the evidence of a life well lived. "I am," I replied simply. "Not because everything is perfect, or because all wounds are healed, but because I finally stopped defining my happiness by whether or not I was included in your life." He winced slightly but nodded. "I read your letter again before we came. The part where you said Rachel and I treated you like you were only valuable when you were useful to us. That kept me up at night." "It wasn't easy to write," I admitted, "but it was true." "Yes," he acknowledged quietly. "It was. And I'm sorry, Mom. Truly sorry." The apology washed over me like a gentle wave. Welcome, healing, but not erasing. The marks left by the long drought that had preceded it. "Thank you," I said. "I hope you know that I never stopped loving you, even when I had to step away." He nodded, blinking rapidly. That's the part I understood least at first. How setting that boundary was an act of love, not punishment. It's taken me time to see it. We sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching the children run along the shoreline, their laughter carried up to us on the sea breeze. "Rachel's struggling," Jason said finally. "With Michigan, with her new position, with a lot of things. Her parents are pressuring her about having another baby. Her firm isn't what she thought it would be, and she's—" He trailed off. "Unhappy," I finished for him, and looking for somewhere to direct that unhappiness. He glanced at me sharply. "How did you know?" "Because I've spent years being the convenient target for Rachel's dissatisfaction," I said, gently. "It wasn't about me then, and it isn't about me now. It's about her." Jason rubbed his face wearily. "I don't know what to do." "You don't have to figure it all out today," I told him. "But I hope you'll remember that you deserve kindness too. Not just Rachel, not just the children. You." He looked startled, as if this concept had never occurred to him. Perhaps it hadn't. Perhaps in his effort to keep the peace with Rachel, to avoid conflict at all costs, he had forgotten that his own happiness mattered. When they left the next morning, I didn't cry. I hugged my grandchildren tightly, promising to answer every letter, to keep sending Professor updates, to preserve their special shells until their next visit. I embraced Jason with genuine affection, neither clinging nor distant. And I waved from my garden as their car disappeared down the coastal road, not knowing when I would see them again, but at peace with that uncertainty. That afternoon, David brought over transplants for the bare corner of my garden, lavender, rosemary, and a delicate purple flower I didn't recognize. "Violets," he explained, noting my curious expression. "They're tougher than they look. can survive all sorts of conditions and still bloom beautifully. I thought of the pressed violet in my wallet, of Emma's watercolor flower, of the unexpected resilience I had discovered in myself. "They're perfect," I said, already planning where they would thrive best. As we worked side by side in the golden afternoon light, I reflected on the long, painful journey that had led me here. From that moment in Jason and Rachel's kitchen with the soup pot in my hands, to this peaceful garden by the sea. I had lost much along the way. The family unity I had valued above all else, the daily presence of my grandchildren, the comfortable assumptions about what my later years would look like. But I had gained something precious too. The knowledge that I was more than enough on my own, that my worth wasn't determined by whether others found me useful or convenient, that it was never too late to reclaim my dignity, to create joy, to build a life that honored both my past and my future. I had handed over those house keys with a smile, surrendering what I thought mattered most. But in that surrender, I had found the courage to take back what truly belonged to me all along: my self-respect, my independence, my capacity for happiness beyond the narrow confines of others' approval. The keys to this new life had been within me all along. I had simply needed the courage to use them. 2 years passed in a rhythm I'd created for myself, seasons flowing one into another like watercolors on wet paper. My coastal cottage transformed from a neglected property into a true haven, each improvement reflecting my own blossoming. The garden flourished with every passing season. Professor claimed more sunny spots throughout the house, and my circle of genuine friendships expanded like ripples in still water. My relationship with David deepened into something neither of us had expected to find at this stage of life. Not a replacement for what we'd lost, but something entirely new. A companionship built on mutual respect, shared interests, and the wisdom that comes from having already lived full lives. We maintained separate homes but shared meals, garden projects, community events, and quiet evenings watching the sunset over the ocean. His daughter's family welcomed me warmly, his grandchildren calling me Miss Margaret with easy affection. My correspondence with Emma and Thomas continued faithfully. Emma, now 12, sent thoughtful letters about books she was reading and her growing interest in marine biology, perhaps influenced by our beach explorations during that first visit. Thomas, 10 and exuberant as ever, preferred to send elaborate drawings with brief captions, each one carefully preserved in an album I kept on my coffee table. They visited again the following summer, this time for 2 weeks that passed in a blur of beach picnics, tide pool explorations, and late-night board games. Jason called monthly, our conversations growing gradually less strained, more authentic. He never directly addressed the ongoing tension with Rachel, but I could read between the lines. Their marriage was struggling under the weight of her perpetual dissatisfaction, his growing assertiveness, and the distance that had developed between them. I never offered unsolicited advice, never criticized Rachel, simply listened and occasionally asked questions that might help him find his own clarity. Then, on a blustery March morning as I was preparing for my book club meeting, my phone rang, with a call from Michigan. It was unusual for Jason to call midweek, and a flutter of concern rose in my chest as I answered. "Mom?" His voice sounded tight, controlled in a way that immediately alerted me something was wrong. "I need to tell you something important." I sat down at my kitchen table, bracing myself. "I'm listening." "Rachel and I are separating," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "It's been building for a long time, but I just can't do it anymore. She's moved in with her parents temporarily while we figure out next steps." I took a deep breath, careful to keep my tone neutral. "I'm sorry you're going through this, Jason. Are you okay? How are the children?" He paused, seeming to consider the question seriously. "Actually, I'm relieved. That probably sounds terrible, but it's the truth. I've been walking on eggshells for years, trying to keep the peace, trying to be what she wanted, and I just couldn't do it anymore. The kids are shaken up but not surprised. There's been a lot of tension in the house. What prompted the final decision? I asked gently. There was a long pause. She wanted to move again, to New York this time. Her firm offered her a promotion. I told her I wouldn't uproot the kids again, that Michigan was already far enough from everything and everyone they knew. She said if I really loved her, I'd put her career first. His voice cracked slightly, and I realized that no matter what I gave, it would never be enough. That I'd spent the last decade diminishing myself to avoid conflict, and I was teaching Emma and Thomas that was what love looked like. The insight surprised me, not because it wasn't accurate, but because it echoed so precisely the realization that had led to my own transformation. That's a powerful recognition, I said carefully. I thought about you, he admitted, about what you wrote in that letter 2 years ago, about refusing to be valued only when convenient, about reclaiming your dignity. At the time, I thought, you were being dramatic, maybe even selfish, but now I understand. You were modeling something I needed to learn. Tears pricked at my eyes, but I blinked them away. Sometimes the hardest lessons come from watching someone else's journey. The thing is, Jason continued, I'm thinking about moving back. Not to your town specifically, but somewhere on the coast. The kids miss it there. I miss it. Michigan never felt like home, and with the separation, there's nothing keeping us here except Rachel's family. My heart leapt at the possibility of having them closer, but I kept my voice measured. That's a big decision, Jason. Have you talked to the children about it? Yes, and they're both enthusiastic, especially Emma. She hasn't stopped talking. About the Marine Science Center we visited near you. He paused. I wanted to ask if we could stay with you while we look for a place. Just temporarily, a few weeks at most. 2 years ago, I would have jumped at this chance, rearranged my entire life to accommodate them, seen it as my opportunity to finally be included again. But the woman I had become recognized this moment for what it was. Not an obligation or a test, but simply a question that deserved an honest answer. I would love to have you all here, I said sincerely. But my cottage is small, and you might be more comfortable renting a place nearby. That would give you space to process everything you're going through without feeling cramped or like you need to adapt to my routines. To my surprise, Jason laughed, a genuine sound of relief rather than offense. That's exactly what I was thinking, but I was afraid to suggest it. I didn't want you to think I was rejecting your help. We're both learning new ways to relate. To each other, I observed. More honest ones. Yes, he agreed. We are. After we hung up, I walked out to my garden, now awakening from its winter sleep with early crocuses and snowdrops pushing through the soil. Change was coming again, not the slow, cultivated change I had nurtured here in my coastal refuge, but something more sudden and unpredictable. My son and grandchildren returning to my orbit, not through my desperate efforts to maintain connection, but through Jason's own journey toward self-respect and authentic living. I felt a complex mixture of emotions, joy at the prospect of having them near, concern for the pain the separation must be causing, and a quiet pride in Jason's growing courage. But above all, I felt grateful for the woman I had become in these intervening years. The woman who could welcome them without being consumed by them. The woman who had built a full life that could expand to include them without being defined by their presence or absence. 3 months later, Jason and the children moved into a rented beach house just 10 minutes from my cottage. It was summer again, the coast alive with visitors and vibrant with color. They arrived with a moving truck full of essentials and hearts full of mixed emotions, excitement about the new beginning, lingering sadness about the family fracture, nervousness about starting over. I had prepared a welcome basket with local treats, a hand-drawn map of my favorite coastal spots, and information about schools and activities in the area. I delivered it with a brief hug and a promise to give them space to settle in, resisting the urge to take over, to fix everything, to make their transition my project. The Margaret of 3 years ago would have moved into their rental, rearranged their furniture, and taken control of their lives under the guise of helping. The Margaret of today understood the gift of allowing them to find their own way. That evening, as I tended to my summer vegetables with Professor supervising from a garden bench, I received a text from Jason. "Thank you for understanding exactly what we need right now. Space, but also the security of knowing you're nearby. We'll come for dinner this weekend if that works for you." I smiled, typing back. "Saturday at 6. Nothing fancy. Bring yourselves and your appetites." The dinner was indeed nothing fancy. Just grilled fish from the local market, vegetables from my garden, and a blueberry cobbler that Thomas declared, "Even better than Dad's pancakes, but don't tell him I said that." We ate on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by comfortable silences that no one felt compelled to fill. After dinner, as the children explored the garden in the mauve, fading light, Jason helped me clear the table. "Rachel called yesterday," he said quietly, rinsing a plate before handing it to me. "She's filing for divorce and wants full custody." I set down the dish towel. "How do you feel about that?" "The divorce part, I've accepted. The custody demand." He shook his head. "That's not happening. I won't give up my children. They need stability now more than ever." "You'll find the right solution," I said, confident in a way I wouldn't have been before. "You're a wonderful father, Jason. That's always been clear, even during the most difficult times between us." He looked at me with surprise. "You still thought that? Even when I let Rachel push you away? Even when I didn't stand up for you?" I considered my answer carefully. "I thought you were a good father who was making choices I didn't agree with. I never doubted your love for Emma and Thomas, only your willingness to advocate for relationships that mattered to them but inconvenienced Rachel." He winced, but nodded. "That's fair. And accurate." He turned to watch the children through the window, Emma showing Thomas something she'd discovered among the lavender. "I don't want them to look back on their childhood and see a father who didn't stand up for what was right, who didn't protect the relationships that mattered." "They won't," I assured him, "because that's not who you are anymore." Over the following weeks, a new pattern emerged. Jason found work with a local architectural firm specializing in sustainable design. Emma and Thomas enrolled in the coastal town's excellent public schools. They came for dinner at my cottage every Sunday, and sometimes I joined them for pizza and movie nights at their rental. David and Jason bonded over a shared interest in woodworking, leading to a remarkable treehouse project in the massive oak behind their beach house. It wasn't always smooth sailing. Rachel fought the custody arrangement bitterly, her lawyers, painting Jason as an unstable father who had impulsively moved his children across the country on a whim. There were tense phone calls, tearful children, and moments when Jason questioned every decision he'd made. During those times, I offered a listening ear and occasional childcare, but resisted the temptation to take control or demonize Rachel. The children needed to form their own understanding of what was happening without adult bias coloring their perspective. Eventually, a custody agreement was reached. Jason would have primary physical custody during the school year, with Rachel having extended time during summers and holidays. It wasn't ideal for anyone, but it prioritized the children's need for stability while maintaining their relationship with both parents. As autumn arrived, painting the coastal landscape in rich ambers and golds, Jason and the children found a permanent home, a charming craftsman with a wide front porch and a backyard that sloped down to a small private beach. It was close enough to my cottage for easy visits, but far enough to maintain our separate lives and routines. On moving day, I arrived with sandwiches and cold drinks for the movers, but otherwise stayed on the periphery, allowing Jason to orchestrate his own household's establishment. As the last box was carried in and the moving truck departed, he found me arranging the food on their new kitchen counter. "I have something to show you," he said with an uncharacteristic nervousness, "if you have a minute." He led me to a room at the back of the house overlooking the water. It was a beautiful space with large windows and built-in bookshelves, clearly designed as a home office or reading room. "This is for you," he said simply. I looked at him in confusion. "What do you mean?" "It's your room. For visits, for holidays, for whenever you want to be here but still have your own space." He gestured to the adjoining bathroom. "It's fully self-contained. You can come and go as you please, be as involved or independent as you want." I stood speechless, taking in the thoughtful details, the reading chair positioned to catch the morning light, the desk overlooking the water, the soft throw blanket in my favorite shade of blue. "Jason, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he replied. "You don't even have to use it if you don't want to. But I wanted you to know that you will always have a place here. Not because we need something from you, not because it's convenient, but because you're family, real family." The deliberate echo of Rachel's cruel dismissal, "You're not the real grandma," transformed now into an affirmation of genuine connection, brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you," I said simply, knowing he understood all that those two words contained. That Christmas, our first with Jason and the children in their new coastal home, brought an unexpected development. Rachel, who had initially indicated she wouldn't be using her holiday visitation time, changed her mind at the last minute. She would be staying at a hotel in town and wanted the children for Christmas Eve and morning. Jason was frustrated by the late change of plans but determined to handle it gracefully for the children's sake. "We'll do our celebration on Christmas afternoon and evening," he told me as we decorated his living room tree. "She should be bringing them back around noon." I nodded, admiring the handmade ornament Thomas had created at school. "That sounds like a good solution." What none of us anticipated was Rachel's appearance at my cottage on December 23rd. I was baking cookies with David when the doorbell rang, and I opened it to find her standing on my porch, looking simultaneously determined and uncomfortable. "Rachel," I said, genuinely surprised. "Come in." She hesitated before stepping inside, her eyes taking in my cozy living room with its cheerful decorations and the evidence of my settled, content life. "I won't stay long," she said. I thought we should talk before I see the children." I invited her to sit and offered tea, which she accepted with visible relief, as if the familiar ritual gave her something to focus on besides the awkwardness of this unexpected reunion. "Your home is lovely," she said politely as I handed her the steaming mug. "The children talk about it all the time." "Thank you," I replied, settling into the chair opposite her. "They're always welcome here." An uncomfortable silence fell between us. David had tactfully made himself scarce, retreating to the garden with Professor to give us privacy. "I owe you an apology," Rachel finally said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "For many things, but especially for calling you a burden. It was cruel and untrue." I studied her face, thinner than I remembered, with new lines of stress around her eyes and mouth. "Thank you for saying that." I am. She struggled for words. "I haven't been well, Margaret. Not for a long time. Depression, anxiety. I've been treating everyone around me terribly because I couldn't stand being in my own skin." She took a shaky breath. "It's not an excuse, just context." "Are you getting help?" I asked gently. She nodded. "Therapy twice a week. Medication that's finally starting to make a difference." She glanced around again. "Seeing how well the children are doing here, how happy they are, it's forced me to confront some hard truths about myself. Growth often comes through Difficult realizations, I observed. Yes. She met my eyes directly. One of those realizations is how much damage I did by cutting you out of their lives. Out of our lives. I was jealous of your relationship with Jason, threatened by your bond with the children. I convinced myself you were judging me, interfering with my parenting, when really. She paused. You were just loving them. And I couldn't bear to share that love because I was so insecure in my own. The honesty of her words caught me off guard. This wasn't the Rachel I had known. Defensive, manipulative, calculating. This was someone humbled by pain and genuinely seeking reconciliation. The past is past, I said carefully. What matters now is moving forward in a way that's healthy for the children. And for all of us, she added. I'm not asking to be friends, Margaret. Too much has happened for that. But I am asking if we can find a way to be family again. Complicated, imperfect family who are trying their best to do better than before. I considered her request, remembering the journey that had brought me to this moment. From the broken-hearted woman holding soup in a hostile kitchen to the confident, self-possessed person I'd become. The old Margaret might have eagerly accepted any crumb of inclusion, any hint of reconciliation, regardless of whether the underlying issues had been addressed. The new Margaret needed more. I appreciate your honesty, Rachel, and I'm genuinely glad you're getting the help you need. I leaned forward slightly. If we're going to move forward, though, it needs to be with complete transparency. I won't go back to walking on eggshells or pretending everything is fine when it isn't. I won't diminish myself or my relationship with my grandchildren to make you comfortable. Can you accept that? She didn't answer immediately, seeming to truly consider the question. I think so, she said finally. I'm learning that other people's love for my children doesn't diminish my importance in their lives. It enhances it. She gave a small, sad smile. I wish I had understood that years ago. We all have regrets, I said. The question is what we do with them. She nodded, setting down her mug and standing. I should go. Thank you for seeing me. At the door, she paused. Jason told me about the room he created for you in their new house. It was a good idea. The children need you in their lives. Consistently, permanently. I won't interfere with that anymore. As I watched her walk to her car, I felt an unexpected sense of closure. Not the dramatic kind seen in movies, where enemies become friends and all wounds are magically healed. Something more realistic but no less meaningful. The quiet acknowledgement of past harm. The tentative first steps toward a healthier dynamic. The promise of something better for the children caught between adult complexities. Christmas Day. Unfolded in ways none of us could have predicted. The children returned from their time with Rachel full of stories and new presents, but also clearly relieved to be back in the comfort of their permanent home. Jason seemed tense until I shared my conversation with Rachel, his shoulders visibly relaxing as I described her changed demeanor and apparent sincerity. She's really trying, he confirmed. The therapist has made a huge difference. We're actually able to have civil conversations about the children now. Our Christmas celebration expanded unexpectedly when David arrived with his daughter's family, turning the intimate gathering into a joyful houseful. As we shared the feast Jason had prepared, I looked around the table at these people who had become my chosen family, some by blood, others by circumstance, all by deliberate connection and mutual care. Emma leaned over to whisper in my ear, "This is the best Christmas ever, Grandma. Everyone who matters is here." Her simple observation captured the journey perfectly. 3 years ago, I had stood in a kitchen holding soup, being told I didn't matter, that I wasn't real family. Today, I sat at the heart of a gathering that existed in part because I had finally recognized my own worth. Because I had smiled and handed over those house keys with dignity rather than desperation. Because I had taken back the power to define myself rather than accepting others' diminished version of me. As the evening wound down, Jason found me on the porch, watching the stars emerge over the darkening ocean. We stood in companionable silence for a moment before he spoke. I was thinking about that day, when Rachel called you a burden, and you just handed over your keys and walked away. He shook his head. I didn't understand then what you were doing. I thought you were just hurt and angry. I was hurt, I acknowledged. But what I was really doing was deciding not to participate in my own diminishment anymore. It changed everything, he said quietly. Not right away, not obviously, but fundamentally. You showed me what self-respect looks like, Mom. You showed me that love doesn't mean accepting mistreatment. He turned to face me directly. You saved yourself, and in doing so, you saved us too. I thought about the long path that had led us here. The pain of exclusion, the grief of disconnection, the hard-won peace of self-reclamation, and now this unexpected restoration, not to what had been before, but to something new and perhaps stronger for having been broken and mindfully mended. We saved each other, I said, linking my arm through his as we gazed out at the endless horizon. And we're still doing it, every day, by choosing to see each other clearly and love each other anyway. Inside, laughter rang out as David apparently told one of his infamous fishing stories, the children's delighted giggles mingling with adult chuckles. The sound wrapped around us like a warm blanket on this cool Christmas night. I had handed over those house keys with a smile and walked away, not knowing where that path would lead. It had led here, not to a perfect ending, but to a truthful one. To a life rebuilt on the foundation of self-worth, rather than others' approval. To family connections based on mutual respect, rather than obligation or convenience. To the quiet joy of being valued for exactly who I am, no more, no less. I had taken it all back. My dignity, my autonomy, my capacity for joy independent of others' validation. And in doing so, I had created space for authentic love to find its way back. To me, not as a desperate need, but as a freely given gift. The keys to lasting happiness, I had discovered, were not the ones I had handed to Rachel that day in her kitchen. They had been inside me all along, waiting for the courage to use them. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.